Shunsui Kyoraku's clash against Lille Barro is one of the most important battles in Bleach for a number of reasons, but none more so than the simple fact that it is Shunsui's biggest and most important conflict in Bleach. This battle allowed Shunsui to showcase the true depths of his Shinigami abilities and his battle intelligence. Now with the Bleach anime on the horizon, a lot of things could be handled differently with this fight, so I wanted to give you my thoughts on the battle as it currently exists in the manga. If anything changes in the future, we can talk about it then. So as always, if you like the content, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, so jumping right in. This battle begins when the Gotei 13 landed in the royal palace, now named the Varvelt. Due to Yhwach's domination over the Reiatsu in the area, the Shinigami were forced to attack on foot, and while the group was running, Lille Barro, perched up in the forward distance on a ledge, began to attack them. He took out a few stragglers, including Shuhei Hisagi. The crew was forced to keep moving in order to make it difficult for the attacker to snipe at them, but it also meant that they couldn't find the attacker. The only way they could know who was attacking them is to stop moving, but of course if you stop moving, you make yourself an easy target. Shunsui decides to be the one to take that chance and stops moving. He takes a look around and immediately sees where the attacker is, but in that split second, Lille Barro snipes him through the chest. Thinking that he's had another kill, Barro begins to hear a voice cycling through phrases of words. Out of nowhere, Shunsui appears behind him and cuts off a piece of his weapon, telling him that first, it's going to be your weapon, and next, it'll be your life. Shunsui commends Nanao for keeping up with him, but he tells her to go and join the others. She's reluctant to do so at first, but accepts that she cannot do much here right now. With Shunsui and Lille faced off against each other, Shunsui explains what he just did, a game called Daruma-san ga Koronda. In this game, a person who is designated as it closes their eyes and calls out a phrase repeatedly. The goal here is to try and catch the people who are still moving. However, there are 3 rules. Rule number 1, whoever is it and has their eyes closed must be in a place where they can be seen by all other players. Rule number 2, if players are seen moving by it, they immediately lose. And rule number 3, if the other players can touch whoever is it before they are seen, they win. Lille processes this information at incredible speeds and concludes that in order for the game to start, Shunsui has to be able to see the Reiatsu of the person who has been designated as it. Once he knows who that is, he's then able to move on the trajectory towards the person using the fastest possible route. During that time, the person who is now it sees an illusion of him. Lille's conclusion is very clear and decisive. If he had seen Shunsui while he was moving, the illusion would have been broken and Shunsui would have died. He doesn't quite understand why Shunsui would take such a risk, but Shunsui's really laid back about it. A game is no fun if both people don't know the rules, he says. But he does give Lille one small correction. What you saw back there? That was actually me. That was not an illusion at all. This then opens up an interesting idea within Bleach combat, and I want to talk about this here. Every person that engages in Bleach combat uses their senses to fight. They're known as Reikaku or Reiatsu Chikaku. They use their literal eyes, and they use their Reikaku to see. There's sight on a literal level and sight on a subconscious level. When concentrating in the midst of battle, Reikaku takes on an overwhelming amount of perception. In other words, you stop seeing with your eyes, you start to see with your Reiatsu sensor. And so back there, Lille didn't see a fake. Shunsui left a consolidated form of his Reiatsu behind and used it to trick Lille Barro. Now, Lille can't believe it. There's no way he'd mistake a Reiatsu clone for the real Shunsui, but Shunsui cuts him off, and right here, he says a very, very cool line. He says, "Oh, but you would. You'd be wise to remember who it is you're talking to. I'm the Captain Commander of the Gotei 13, Shunsui Kyoraku." I cannot tell you how beautiful it is to witness Shunsui embracing his role as Captain Commander. You forget because he's always goofing off, but make no mistake, this man is one of the most brilliant, fundamentally sound fighters in the entire Bleach universe. Shunsui instantly dashes to Lille's side and Lille springs into action, breaking off a piece of his gun and firing at Shunsui. He hits Shunsui, but he's seen another clone. Shunsui stabs his sword into the ground and uses Kageokuri. Lille reacts instantly and jumps into the air before firing into Shunsui's shadow. Shunsui actually gets damaged by Lille's attack, just hammering home the fact that the Royal Guard of Yhwach are great fighters in their own right who have intel on the entirety of the Gotei 13. Stern Ritter X, the X-axis, Lille Barro, has the power to pierce through anything and everything. He takes aim and fires at Shunsui again, but once more it's a fake. Shunsui remains calm, standing behind him. Shunsui has now added a new game into the mix, something called Kageokuri, a game where by staring hard enough at your shadow, you can project an afterimage onto a different location. If someone with as much Reikaku as Lille Barro is looking, then an extremely lifelike afterimage is left behind. The scary part of playing with children is that you have no control. They grab your hand and off you go, unable to get out of it. And so, since I've already gotten a hold of your hand, we may as well play until one of us drops dead. Back at the rest of the Gote, some want to go and help Shunsui, but Shinji advises them to keep on moving. Remembering how Ukitake would react if he were here, saying, if Shunsui says he's okay, then he's okay. Not to mention, Shinji understands what the responsibility of a head captain is, to take responsibility of the lives of his soldiers, something Shunsui is trying to do right now. Back at the battle, Lille wonders why Shunsui decided to close the distance between them, wondering if he thinks that will give him an advantage. Shunsui calmly says, actually yes, this would give me an advantage. After all, you're already cut, aren't you? Lille looks down to notice that his gun has been cut. That is how fast Shunsui Kyoraku is right now. Lille puts distance between them and forms a piece of his rifle out of thin air and reforms his weapon. He's preparing to re-engage when Shunsui appears behind him again, telling him not to forget about the rules. I want to highlight an amazing thing that's happening right now, just so you understand how impressive Shunsui is as a fighter. His Zanpakuto ability is to allow him to make children's games into reality and force those within his range to abide by those rules. But different games have different effects, and he can stack different games on top of each other. He knows what game he's going to use and when, and he knows what effect he intends to have over it. He used Daruma-san to find and close the gap between he and Lille Barro, and used Kageokuri to alter Lille's perception of where his real body was. That whole idea relies on the concept of Reikaku. The better a fighter you are, the more reliant you are on your senses. But the more reliant you are on your sense of Reikaku, the easier it is for Shunsui to use Kageokuri to completely confuse your perception of his location. And while you're doing that, he's using Kageoni to attack your shadow, and then switching into Kageokuri to form multiple clones that could all possibly be the real one. It's insane. It's actually insane. And Lille, he can't keep up. He's stabbed by Shunsui and his left eye opens. He explains that when both eyes are open, he's able to use the true power of the X-axis. His bullets will pass through his body and Shunsui's sword will also pass right through his body. During that time, no weapon can kill him, but once he's opened his eye for the third time in battle, he's able to complete that fight with his eyes open. Being the final Quincy granted power by Yhwach, he believes himself to be Yhwach's greatest champion, one who is more than just a man, one on the fringes of godhood. And for him to have been put into vulnerable situations 3 times is something that should never be allowed to happen. He activates his complete holy form and immerses himself in golden light. Stepping out, he takes on a form of a biblically accurate angel somewhat. This brother looks scary, and he calls this form Israel. That's a cool name, by the way. He immediately renders Shunsui immobile and fires 3 light attacks that pierce Shunsui's body. Shunsui instantly retreats as he continues to bleed profusely. Lille continues his pursuit of Shunsui as Shunsui jumps into a room through a window. Lille then basically instantly teleports in front of Shunsui. He literally just kinda spawns out of thin air, as if emerging from a portal or something. Shunsui then tries to attack him with a Kido blade, Hado 78, Zontarin. It causes an explosion in the building but has no effect. Running away trying to figure something out, Shunsui has made it all the way back to the place the Shinigami first arrived when they attacked. Far away from everyone else, he decides to spin the dice one final time. He hopes that Nanao and the others are far enough to not be affected, but he has no choice. It's time for his final option. Sticking his sword into the ground, he utters the words we have longed to hear for so many years. Bankai. Katen Kyokotsu, Karamatsu Shinju. Shadowy roots spawn from Shunsui and surround him as a silhouette of a woman reaches around him. Everyone in the entire city can feel the sudden burst of power, but specifically, they feel the danger. Quincy and Shinigami alike stop what they're doing once they feel the cold chill of Shunsui's Bankai. Lille starts floating around, searching for Shunsui when he takes notice of how bleak and dim the world has become. He then sees Shunsui, who asks him if the world looks differently to him. He asks Lille if he feels like it's full of despair, but Lille retorts and appears above Shunsui, lamenting that an emissary of God does not feel despair. He fires at Shunsui, destroying a part of the city when he notices a bunch of wounds all over his body. The wounds inflicted on your partner's body appear on your own as though they are being shared, but you will not be able to die from them. He then goes on into Act 2, the cushion of deep remorse. It opens and Lille is struck with wounds all over his body. Shunsui explains that Act 2 revolves around the man from Act 1, who comes to regret the wounds he inflicted on his partner, and lies face down in bed with a deep sense of shame and is stricken with an incurable disease. This then flows into Act 3, the Abyss. Both Shunsui and Lille are thrust into an ocean of water, with the pressure pushing them down towards the never-ending bottom. Lille tries to fly out, but no matter what he does, no matter how fast he moves, he's unable to reach the top. For this act, both the man and woman seemingly throw themselves into this rising water until each other's spiritual pressures are exhausted. While in this state, Shunsui's Bankai is made manifest and it reaches around his neck and he calls her by her name, Sakuranosuke. She's an older woman with a very sensual vibe around her. She plays around with Shunsui, lamenting at how calm Shunsui is, even though he rarely ever comes to play with her. Kubo's expansion of Shunsui's relationship with his Zanpakuto is very welcome, because every Shinigami relates to their sword in different ways. The personalities of each Zanpakuto differs and the chemistry they share is also unique to them specifically. In this case, she presents as though she's a jealous wife-like character who isn't happy with Shunsui's womanizing ways, from his lack of time spent with her in Bankai, for obvious reasons, to him wearing a kimono belonging to another woman, and things of that sort. But even though she's mean to Shunsui, she understands that she is his Zanpakuto, and will be by his side until the very end. Lille sees Shunsui talking to himself and lunges at him. At that point, Shunsui sheaths his two blades and a white thread appears, wrapping around Lille's neck until Shunsui calls out the final act, blood-stained windpipe, cutting off Lille's head and seemingly killing him. Lille's head explodes as he falls down into the abyss. Shunsui succumbs to his own injuries and falls into the arms of his Zanpakuto. They share a cute moment together, connecting over how both of them now have one eye each. Everything seems fine when Shunsui is attacked from below and a light attack pierces through his body. Lille manifests in front of Shunsui and begins to reform his severed head. This time, he takes the form of a bird-like creature. As it would seem, Barro is unable to be killed by literal weapons or by decapitation via Ryotsu. He raises his hand to the sky and releases a golden beam of light, which saws off a part of the floating city. Shunsui is able to evade this, but as he's hiding behind a building, we get to see a little bit of why his Bankai is so dangerous for him to use. You see, despite the risk involved with Shunsui having to abide by the rules of the play he inflicts on his opponents, it would seem to me that his Bankai, Sakuranosuke's relationship with him is rather toxic. Like, let me explain. She's sworn to be by his side and obviously cares about his well-being, but she also wants him to stay with her forever, even though that toes the line of life and death. She doesn't tell him to keep fighting. She doesn't tell him to hold steadfast. She almost coaxes him into giving up. She tells him, "Rest a while, and I shall carry you away." You might say that she's just offering him a moment of peace before he dies, but I think this is also one of the reasons why his Bankai is dangerous to use. He might be coaxed into staying with the quote wife figure who tragically not only thrusts herself into the ocean with her husband, but actually kills him with a thread. Luckily, Nanao snaps Shunsui out of it and asks Shunsui to give her Zanpakuto. Okay, pause here. Before I go into the analysis of this relationship, we have to establish something. This thing that Kubo did, whatever this is, I didn't like it before and I still do not like it now. But I want to explain what I mean here. The battle between Shunsui and Lille was great. The Bankai reveal was epic. His Bankai ability was satisfactory, earning the right to have been built up for all these years. The backstory we're about to go into is also great Kubological writing. It does a ton for Shunsui's character in ways only Kubo can, truly. But this Nanao insert, while on its own is not a problem for me, it's initiated poorly. It comes out of nowhere to me, and there's no running from that. Sure, we've all been wondering where Nanao Zanpakuto was, but Kubo never really gave us any reason to care enough about the character of Nanao. So before I jump into praising what is still a great backstory, I just wanted to preface it by saying, the setup to the backstory and the lack of foreshadowing leading up to it was not good, but the meat of the story itself is great, as you will soon find out. So, back to the story here, Shunsui escapes into the shadows with Nanao, and there they have a conversation. Shunsui, due to a promise made to Nanao's mother, held possession of her Zanpakuto called Kyokotsu. Let's break this down. Years ago, a young Shunsui is awoken by a woman, his sister-in-law, and one who is Nanao's mother. On the outside, Lille finds the shadow they're hiding in and tries to shine a light into it in order to force them out. The shadow moves across the ground and onto Lille's head when Nanao leaps from the darkness with a veiled weapon in hand. We cut back in time to Shunsui and Nanao's conversation, where he explains that his Zanpakuto is Katen Kyokotsu, and Kyokotsu isn't exactly Nanao's Zanpakuto, but rather, Ohana, the Katen part of Katen Kyokotsu, gave birth to Okyo, the Kyokotsu part of Katen Kyokotsu, because of Nanao's mother. Before I continue, this point is very important to me in that people often assume that Zanpakuto forms are set in stone, but between Shunsui and Ichigo, I actually believe that certain Zanpakuto, given the right circumstances and the right mindset of the wielder, can actually influence the way their Zanpakuto looks. A classic example I always use is Ichigo. Ichigo Kurisaki's Zanpakuto is Zangetsu. Old Man Zangetsu left behind a single sword for Ichigo, representing white. Old Man Zangetsu's words to Ichigo were that I'm not your real Zanpakuto, he is, and now I'm stepping aside so you can attain that true power. And so, Zangetsu is represented in a single sword. Ichigo, however, is the one to say, no, both you and him are both Zangetsu, accepting not one sword, but two. In other words, Ichigo being a dual wielder is a byproduct of his decision to accept both avenues of power. There is a world where that doesn't happen, and in the same way, or close enough, Shunsui here is showing that his one sword Katen gave birth to another sword Kyokotsu based on a deliberate request by Nanao's mother, and so him being two out of the three dual wield soul reapers in history is not something that happened organically. It was deliberate on his part after being asked to do so by another person. That's incredible to me. I really enjoy unearthing interesting details like that. But let's get back to the story. The Ise clan Nanao hails from is a matrilineal clan, which means only females get born into the family. Given that they're all female, in order to marry, they bring in husbands from other families into the clan. However, it's said that any man who joins the Ise clan will die an early death due to the Ise clan curse. And so, Ise women leave the clan, they find a husband, bring the husband back into the clan, they have kids, and those kids end up being women, but then the men die an early death. Some members of the family thought that curse to be foolish, but not Nanao's mother. She didn't just believe it, she wanted to escape it. Instead of bringing a husband into the Ise family, she married outside the family and joined a different house. I think she must have assumed that the curse aspect had to do with the men coming into her family, so instead of bringing someone in, she just left and joined someone else. Unfortunately though, as fate would have it, her husband passed away shortly after, and her now dead husband is Shunsui's older brother. Now, Shunsui had a complicated relationship with his older brother, but after his brother married Nanao's mother, whose name we don't know, their relationship became much more stable. Shunsui would go over there to lie on their porch and spend time there because of how peaceful it became. But then, when his brother died, things became very complicated. Nanao's mother was sent back into the Ise family, and obviously you can imagine how problematic that became. Not only could she not escape the fate of the Ise family curse, but she had sought to break it and failed and was now sent back into that very family. Now, the reason for this curse lies in a particular weapon. Nanao's mother was desperate to make sure her daughter did not fall victim to this curse, and so Shunsui took the sword and had Okyo hide it since she likes playing hide and seek. Okyo reaches into her face and pulls out the sword, handing it to Nanao. This cuts back to real time with Nanao facing off against Lille. She understands that Shunsui does not want to give the sword to her, and she knows what that might mean for her future. But in the same way her mother chose to reject the clan curse and escape, she chooses to embrace the clan curse and fight. But she knows that the man she admires, Shunsui, who is essentially her uncle, would laugh off this ridiculous curse and stand with her regardless. Kubo goes on to explain that the Ise clan is a line of priests. They do not have individuals on Pakto. They merely oversee rituals. Instead of everyone having an individual Zanpakuto, the head of the family in every generation inherits one single Zanpakuto that is then passed down from generation to generation. It's a ceremonial sword with no edge, and so it cannot kill. But this sword has the power to oppose gods by absorbing their power and scattering it far and wide. This sword is named Shinken Hakyoken. Kubo takes us into yet another flashback. Nanao's unnamed mother was speaking to Shunsui, and she's wearing the kimono that Shunsui wears now. She hands him the Shinken Hakyoken, telling him that it would not exert its influence over people not of the Ise family, and that he is the only one she can trust it with. Nanao as a child overheard this conversation and noticed the hairpin in Shunsui's hair. When she entered the Soul Reaper Academy, she would often see Shunsui come visit the headmaster Yamamoto, and he would be wearing two hairpins and the exact same kimono that Nanao's mother used to wear. Once she graduated the Soul Reaper Academy, she was assigned to Squad 8 and became one of Shunsui's subordinates, but upon meeting him, she noticed two things. One, he changed his kimono, and two, he took out both hairpins. At that point, she knew that he was the man to whom her mother entrusted everything. Back in real time, Nanao clashes with Lille, but the gap in raw power is evident. She's not fast enough and she's not strong enough. To make matters worse, the intensity of a battle of this level is getting to her and she's fearful. Meanwhile, Shunsui is at an impasse. We learn that Central 46, after learning that Nanao's mother gave away the Shinken Hakyoken, sentenced her to death and killed her. He also remembers what happened with his brother lay on his deathbed, leaving him a hairpin to remember him by. Shunsui is bothered by both of their actions. Both his brother and sister-in-law entrusted him with their prized possession, and he doesn't understand why. He feels he's not worth it. As Nanao fearfully stands before Yhwach's mighty angel of light, unable to find the strength to push on, Shunsui is also burdened with remorse of his own. He can't bear to take back that possession once given to him, and so he pleads for Nanao to take the weight off his shoulders, and in return, he will do what he has to protect her. He steps out of the shadow and takes her hand, ready to stand alongside her. As Shunsui stands with Nanao, he harkens back to the history of his two hairpins, a set shared between his brother and Nanao's mother. Each would hold one part of the set and take solace in the shared connection between the two. Those two family members are now gone. Shunsui for so long had held on to both their hairpins and the sacred treasure, but now he stands wielding the sacred treasure with their daughter and both their hairpins safely embedded in his hair. Barro fires off a flurry of light as Shunsui stands with Nanao, who feels safer and stronger. Lille prepares his powerful attack called Trumpet of God and fires at them. As the blast looms ever closer, Shunsui whispers to Nanao and tells her that everything's gonna be okay. I'll be behind you, supporting you. There's an explosion and the Trumpet of God attack is reflected back at Barro, slicing off half his body, and as his form begins to crumble, he scoffs at the idea of repelling the power of a god. What a grievous sin indeed, he says as he explodes in a flash of light. So ends the battle between Shunsui Kyoraku and Barro. My stance on this is clear. I loved everything about this except how Nanao was inserted. I don't have an issue with Nanao herself or her involvement here. It's just the out of nowhere nature of the entrance. Some people may have an issue with Nanao fighting against Lille to begin with, because she hasn't nearly been built up enough to be clashing with opponents of this level. 100% I understand, but I never quite felt that as a deal breaker for me. The only deal breaker here is the lack of build up to her character. It was the huge 180 the battle took to incorporate her. That is inexcusable, and I hope the anime fixes that. But the battle itself, the clashes between Shunsui and Lille Barro, the powers put on display, the backstory, the character expansion and character growth, all of that is stupendously magnificent. Here is my verdict on Shunsui Kyoraku as a character. For a long time, he's been a sad man who masks his sadness with alcohol and women. Hiding behind the guise of being a playboy, he rants from the fact that he's burdened with the wishes and hopes of those he respects ever so dearly. He's wise beyond his years, but he runs from responsibility. Despite his lack of interest in leading, he's often called to lead. He's entrusted with the hopes and wishes of many people. And despite his desire not to fight, he's constantly forced to fight, and his strength places even greater responsibilities at his feet. The dichotomy of his Zanpakuto Shikai being children's games, but in the same breath, a concept that will be deadly, is all a reflection of Shunsui's own temperament. The tragic nature of his Bankai, specifically the danger of his own Zanpakuto not wanting him to leave her, is another reflection of the isolation he's come to feel, having lost some of the most important people in his life, and his brother and his sister-in-law. And then he loses Yamamoto, his teacher and master. And then he loses Jushiro Ukitake, his best friend for centuries. This is a man who was lost so much over the years, but he finds his own measure of redemption in Nanao. She's the last family he's got, the daughter of his brother, and one who is carrying a burden that he can understand. Even though Shunsui doesn't get to strike down Lille Barro by himself, the biggest benefactor of this fight, and the character of the heart of this conflict, is without a doubt Shunsui Kyoraku. And this narrative Kubo created is one that re-establishes Shunsui as one of the best written characters in all of Bleach. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, see ya.